Betrayed by Procedure. The electrifying story of Air Canada Flight 624. It was an ordinary evening at Toronto Pearson International Airport, the bustling terminals filled with hurried travelers, their faces illuminated by the glow of screens. Among them was Emma Williams, a seasoned flight attendant with Air Canada who had completed countless flights over the years. Tonight's flight, Flight 624 to Halifax, would be no different, or so she thought. As she boarded the aircraft, she greeted her colleagues, a few of them familiar faces. But there was something in the air tonight, a strange unease. Emma dismissed it at first. Maybe it was just the stress of the previous week's back-to-back shifts, or the nerves that often crept up before a long flight. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite place. The cabin crew conducted their usual checks, preparing for takeoff. Emma took her position by the aisle, glancing occasionally at the cockpit crew as they readied the plane. There was Captain Michael Andrews, a man known for his calm demeanor and exceptional record. Next to him, First Officer Lucas Bennett, a young pilot with a bright future, but still somewhat green in his experience. Emma noticed him fidgeting with his controls. She had worked with Lucas on a few flights before, and he was usually more composed. But tonight, his eyes darted nervously as he interacted with the flight systems. "We're good to go," Captain Andrews's voice broke through her thoughts. The plane taxied down the runway, lifting into the crisp evening air. It felt like any other flight, but as the plane ascended, Emma felt the tension in her chest tighten. Something was wrong. Maybe it was her instincts or the subtle change in the atmosphere around her. The hum of the engines, normally reassuring, felt off. A sense of dread gnawed at her. The first hour of the flight was uneventful. Drinks were served, the seatbelt sign was turned off, and the cabin crew moved about, doing their usual rounds. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She overheard snippets of conversation between the pilots, technical terms she didn't fully understand but made her uncomfortable nonetheless. Then, at around 35,000 feet, the autopilot malfunctioned. Emma's heart skipped a beat when she heard the warning beep. She turned sharply to the cockpit. Captain Andrews was calm, but his voice had a subtle edge to it. "This is strange," he muttered, eyes scanning the control panel. "What's wrong?" Lucas asked, his voice cracking just slightly. "Autopilot failure," Captain Andrews replied. "Let's switch to manual and see what we've got." Emma's pulse quickened. She knew that manual control was no easy task, especially at cruising altitude. But she trusted Andrews. He was a seasoned pilot. Still, the air felt heavy. She excused herself from the cabin, making her way to the cockpit. As she entered, she noticed Lucas's hand trembling over the controls. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice a little more strained than usual. I think so," Lucas replied, but his voice didn't have the conviction it usually did. Captain Andrews shot Emma a look that said everything she needed to know. There was something off about the situation, and they both knew it. The warning lights started flashing. The engine on the left wing sputtered, causing the plane to tilt slightly. The passengers' murmurs could be heard in the cabin. Emma's stomach churned. "What's happening?" she demanded, her eyes darting between the two pilots. "We have engine trouble," Captain Andrews said, his voice taut. "I'm going to need your help, Emma. We're going to divert to the nearest airport." Emma nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Understood." She quickly returned to the cabin, her mind racing. The turbulence had picked up, and the passengers were beginning to panic. She knew she had to stay calm, but her mind kept returning to the strange tension between the pilots. They hadn't seemed entirely sure of what was going on. Could there be more to the story? Suddenly, the plane lurched violently. Emma stumbled, grabbing the seat in front of her for support. A collective gasp rose from the passengers. She rushed to the front, and that's when she heard it, a voice crackling through the intercom. "This is Air Canada Flight 624. We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain calm, and we will update you as soon as we have more information." It was Captain Andrews's voice, but there was something different about it. His tone was more strained than before. A chill ran down Emma's spine. She bolted for the cockpit again, but when she entered, she froze. Captain Andrews was slumped over in his seat, unconscious. Lucas was frantically trying to stabilize the plane, his face pale and drenched in sweat. He's not responding, Lucas stammered, panic creeping into his voice. Emma rushed forward, checking Andrews's pulse. He was still alive, but barely. There was no time to waste. She grabbed the radio, trying to call for help, but the static only intensified. Emma, we can't make it to Halifax. Lucas's voice trembled as he fought to keep the plane level. We need to land now. But we have no control over the engines, and I don't know how long we can keep this up. Emma's mind raced. She had been trained for emergencies, but this was unlike anything she had encountered before. Is there any airport nearby? She asked, doing her best to stay composed. Lucas nodded. There's a small strip in a town called Kingston. It's our best shot. The situation was dire. Emma didn't have time to think about protocol or procedure. Her instincts took over. All right, Lucas. I'll guide you as much as I can. The plane was rapidly losing altitude, the control systems failing one by one. The engines sputtered, barely keeping them airborne. The once calm, professional air had turned to desperation. Emma took a deep breath and returned to the cabin, rallying the passengers. Everyone listen to me, she shouted, her voice strong but her insides trembling. We're making an emergency landing. Remain calm and follow the instructions we've given you. We'll get through this. She returned to the cockpit, the final descent already underway. Lucas was breathing heavily, his hands gripping the controls with a white-knuckle intensity. Can you do it? She asked, her voice tight with anxiety. He nodded, though his face was grim. I don't know, but we have no choice. The landing gear was deployed, and the plane dropped toward the runway with a terrifying speed. Emma held her breath, praying they would make it. Then, with a bone-jarring thud, the wheels hit the ground. The plane skidded, the screeching of metal filling the cabin as the brakes engaged. It felt like an eternity before the plane finally came to a halt. Silence. A heavy, oppressive silence. Emma stumbled to her feet, her heart still racing. She quickly checked the cockpit. Lucas had done it. They were on the ground. The worst was over, but she knew this wasn't the end of the story. There would be investigations, questions, and answers that needed to be found. What happened to the autopilot? What caused the engine failure? And why had the plane's systems malfunctioned so suddenly? As emergency responders surrounded the aircraft, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far more sinister.